tech expedition with Kubernetes magicians. Add some spring to the mission. It's your crowd. Cloud made this crew. Cloud famous too. Cloud native crew.
We did it.
Yeah.
Oh,
I think
That's
this
always
time
a
we
good
got
deal.
the whole song in the recording, so everyone can hear the first line. And join our tech expedition.
Nailed it.
Oh,
We're getting better.
yeah.
Oh.
Polishing this. How are you guys? How were your last 2 weeks?
oh, not
I've been
good.
looking forward to this for about 2 weeks.
Are you over your cold, Josh?
Oh, it's just, I wish that was all I had. So I had the cold, right? Cold's better. Then I went to Atlanta, Georgia for DevNexus, which was a good idea. And there I saw wonderful people. And then some of those wonderful people in turn tested positive for COVID. So coincident with that, I started, like after I returned, I was only in Georgia for like 22 hours, 21 hours. The entire journey was 21 hours. Like, I mean, that includes the flight times, right? So, like, I was there for just a minute and a minute and a half, really. Avoided my conference surface area, heavily masked, full body condom, like everything I could do to, stay out of the way of the virus. And then I get home, and like 3 days later, in that period where you could get symptoms, that look like COVID, I started feeling lightheaded, which is how I normally feel when faced with like a bad fever or PHP code, right? And so this time it was very clearly a bad fever, and I thought it was. I mean,
around.
no, none. It's not allowed in the house. But I didn't have a fever either. I didn't have the temperature. I didn't have body aches. I had nothing. Just the lightheadedness. I'm like, well, that's bizarre. I mean, what kind of? Maybe it's like a very almost asymptomatic case of COVID. And
Did you already know people had COVID by the time you felt lightheaded?
Yeah, because everybody was like saying, "Oh, I got it." I got the wrong kind of souvenir from this conference.
Mm-hmm.
And anyway, that stuff happens, right? I just wasn't eager to repeat it, and so I was like, this is gonna suck a month out of my life, if I get the Rona. So I was just eager to prove that I didn't, but I still had something that wouldn't allay my concerns, right? The test came back negative. That was great. I passed in that respect, but I still felt lightheaded, and I was talking to my doctor, and he just knew exactly. I said, Doc, I've been dizzy for like 4 days. You ever like get motion sick? You ever get like not you two, but have you ever met somebody who got drunk enough that when they drink and they turn left or right really quickly, that they get like the room keeps spinning even after their head stops?
I don't know that feeling at all. I mean,
No, of course not. Yeah, no, I mean hypothetically, of course. Yeah. So, but like I've been told that when you get drunk, you can get motion sick,
Yeah.
And there's vertigo or whatever. It's something like that. I don't quite understand what all that is. So apparently, that's what I was feeling. Like I felt like I was perpetually, as the kids say, drunk, right? And I didn't know what it was. I got to the point where I'm like, I'm not even sure if I want to drive. I don't feel, sturdy. So my doctor's like, oh yeah, this happens a lot. Your eustachian tubes are all plugged up. And I didn't know what that was. I had to Google that. And
that explains your tweet.
Yeah, I who knew? I did not. That's me. That's the one person who did not, apparently. So when I was a kid, I had every now and then I get earaches. Did you ever have earaches, like pains next to your ear? Not the ear proper, but like right behind it, kind of, right inside the cavernous thing that is my skull. So there was these pains, and apparently that pain when you're a child is because A, you don't know how to blow your nose and expel congestion, and B, it's a straight canal, and so the stuff just gets in there, and it's easy to get in there and accrue and cause pain, agony, Well, as an adult, I guess that tube contorts, so first of all, it's just physically harder to get gunked up, but it can still do that. And I don't have agony, but I do have that dizziness, that sort of lightheadedness. And apparently that's to do with that eustachian tube getting gummed up, and it's not conducting sound in the normal way. And since sound and your hearing is all related to your sense of balance,
That's
what it is.
Before.
That's the what?
Before. That's the echo we were hearing before.
Oh,
Or maybe you were hearing it.
yeah.
I
We were
wasn't
talking about
hearing
an
it.
echo before.
I was.
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
Yeah, everybody
was?
else that went to DevOps, and I read the Twitter,
Oh.
and they're feeling good. And I was like, oh,
Maybe you need to check your station too.
I wasn't in Atlanta, but
yeah. Oh, no. Yeah. Did you get like a sympathetic cough?
maybe.
I used to get bad earaches when I would fly as a kid. Every time I
Yeah.
would fly, and then it kind of went away as I don't know when you're getting older. Maybe that's because the tubes changed.
That's exactly it. So the
Oh, is
cold,
it?
the cold was gone as far as I knew. Right, I felt fine. I could breathe fine. I wasn't oozy or whatever. I wasn't leaking, and so and then like fast forward 10 days after which I by this point I feel great. I get on the plane and apparently I've still got some congestion, and the altitude change plus the remnants of the congestion equals like this eustachian tube business, and that's why it accrues. So now I actually have drainage. Like the last few days, right?
Yeah.
I've actually got my ears were telling me something was coming before the rest of me knew,
Mhm.
But anyway,
So your
I'm
doctor
actually
knew.
really happy.
Doctor
Right.
did the look, and he
Yes,
oh,
yeah.
yeah, there.
Well, and apparently it happens a lot. So he gets there. He'll have people. He's a traveler's doctor, right? He's a doctor that responds. He'll do hotel calls and things like that. And I can call him at weird hours, So he will go see people that are they have something wrong with them, and they're like, doc, I can't get off the floor. If I do, I'll puke. Right? They have to lay down on the floor, and they get really bad eustachian whatever. I didn't know that was a thing. Who knew? I had
Wow.
earaches, certainly. I had no idea one was connected to the other, and so I guess I'm really happy to have eustachian cloggy bits compared to the alternative, which I thought was
The
COVID.
alternative.
But I wouldn't say it's been a great week. No, DevNexus was great though. Can do, would do again. Just maybe I'm gonna get that Bee Gees helmet. And, spacesuit helmet.
Yeah. I wonder how conferences will have to adjust for the rest of the year based on the DevNexus experience.
Just don't open source that. It's the one thing we ask of you.
Yeah.
It's the one thing.
Keep it closed. Keep the road
Yeah.
closed.
Mhm.
So are
Prior
there
to
is there anything exciting happening in the news, in the tech news lately that we should discuss before we
Yeah.
go into the segments?
Yes.
What do we have?
Well, first of all, it's been a Spring Boot palooza. Like, have you seen all the new Spring Boot releases? It's getting hard to keep my my head around everything. But first of all, Spring Boot 2.7 RC1 just dropped today, and that contains Spring GraphQL, which is nearing RC1 as well. Or I think it's probably RC1. So Spring GraphQL now has RSocket support, so you can do. Because people complain, oh, well, you're using GraphQL, but it's using HTTP. It's not very RESTful, and I'm like, no, duh, right? That's the whole point. It's incidental that it's using HTTP. It could just as well be, WebSockets, which it does support, and now RSocket, right? And so that's great. And then let me see what else. There's a CVE that just came out for Spring Security OAuth. Now this is confusing. This is Spring Security OAuth, which is not the same as the OAuth support for Spring Security, right? So there used to be a project called Spring Security OAuth a long time ago in a galaxy far away. It's still supported, I guess, but we don't recommend it since Spring Security 5.0, which was released in 2017. There's much better support for OAuth inside of Spring Security proper. So as far as I understand, maybe I'm wrong, but it says Spring Security OAuth capital letters as opposed to the OAuth module inside of Spring Security. So I think this applies to the old stuff, not the. Yeah, in fact, it's got its own version, 2.5x. So the Spring Security, the OAuth support in Spring Security is tied to Spring Security's version, which is now at 5x, maybe even 6x. So anyway, that's an older thing. But if you're using that, there's a denial of service that applies that exposes OAuth to client applications only. So check that out. Spring Session, good stuff. Spring GraphQL,
Yeah.
talked about that.
I'm gonna throw this up there. This is we show this during office hours,
What?
calendar.spring.io.
Oh yeah. Oh, yeah.
calendar.spring.io.
Spring.io.
Yeah.
Say it with us now.
I'm gonna get on that.
It's awesome.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, that's a great page.
That's super cool.
But
That's a lot of office hours.
Those
It's,
were the releases. Those are all the
those are
releases. that
Oh,
came out.
gotcha.
Yeah.
and,
Oh wait, so it's a calendar of releases. It's not a calendar of office hours.
Yeah.
Right.
Calendar of releases.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, ones that have been released and ones that are scheduled to be released. So we know
And-
tomorrow, Spring Security, OAuth.
Who is behind that calendar? Who
Spring
made
team,
team.
they keep it
the
updated.
spring team?
Now,
Oh,
keep
wow.
in mind, it's not a binding contract, okay? Like if it doesn't ship tomorrow, weird things have happened. I'm not saying.
So I'm going to overlay that on my calendar and plan my dinners with friends around that, so that I'm not busy when spring is releasing.
I mean,
That's what I'm going to do with that calendar.
That sounds like a great reason to take some. Well, there's a release coming
Priorities
out
in
tomorrow.
order.
I don't want to be clogging up the pipes. Let's
Yeah.
I want to be away at dinner. Yeah, get off the internet. They need the
Mhm.
they need the bites,
Let's go for a walk. Yeah.
Yeah, walk my fish or something.
We have so Ashish Mishra from India again is with us. Hi Ashish, and says, how do I show this? We need some sessions on app transformer of Tanzu. So we've got a welcome surprise for you today with our very special guest.
Wow. Like, did you set that up?
I did not.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it is amazing.
Stay tuned.
Wow.
Tell your friends. It's gonna be amazing.
Cool. Well, we'll get there.
We will.
Yeah.
Cool. What else? Any other news we should highlight?
I feel like there's probably something.
I could give a preview to folks watching that. So 2 weeks ago at our pilot episode, we introduced all of the different segments we plan on doing, and we are going to do today. We won't do all of them every episode. So today we're going to do all but one. So we have on the menu for today a Spring It On segment for you, a Tanzu segment, a Tanzu Players with our very special guest Matt Campbell, and then we're going to top it off with an evolution or revolution. So we'll leave Kubernetes for a different episode. So that's what awaits for the day.
But you will get some Kubernetes today
We will.
anyway.
Oh yeah,
even
we'll
if-
have Kubernetes sprinkled throughout. Yes.
Yeah. So we'll see.
Yeah.
It's not like it's going to be an empty cup. It's just a different cup.
Oh no, we'll do Kanzu Tanzu will be Kubernetes as well.
There's that. Yeah. Neat.
Kubernetes everywhere. So whenever if you let me know when you want to start, unless you have more news.
I think we're out of news. I'm all news.
Out of
Okay.
news?
I can't wait to show you some stuff.
Okay. Would you like to go?
Yeah,
first?
let's go. Let's do it.
Can I? Me?
Can you do the honors,
Yep.
Sean?
Yeah, let's kick it off.
You, Josh, with Spring It On.
We need the like the music.
Yeah.
The
And we
stuff.
need to like the all three of us. Let's say it together. Ready? Okay. Follow my lead. So, but you have to like do it slightly after me. So it's spring.
Spring.
It
Oh. There you go. See?
On.
Yeah. And we get all three of those and we'll layer them on top. And that way we'll press a button instead of doing that because that's a lot of work. That's a lot of work that we just did there. And
Coordination.
we could get, yeah, coordination's hard. I've load balanced clusters. I know.
Mhm.
Let's see. So, okay. So I'm going to share my screen. This might be the hardest part.
I'll scoot off.
Maybe it's all yours, Josh.
You say that, but
Well,
I
share
don't
your
even
screen. Share
Share
your
my
screen
screen.
first.
Share
And
my
then we'll share it from the
screen.
bottom. I'll stay on until your screen is sharing.
okay. How we doing? We good? Yeah.
Good. Okay, so add your
Ah.
screen and get me.
I think she's gone. She just clipped out. Okay. I hope I'm still here. So good. So a couple things. This is a double header. It's 1816. I'm going to try and go as quickly as I can because I want to show you two things. First, we just mentioned Spring Boot 3.0 M2, and I was talking to my buddy Matt Rabel, who just made a really very astute observation. something that I suppose I knew, but I just really hadn't played with it and tried it out yet, which is Spring Boot 3.0 is fast. There's going to be built-in. Remember, Spring Boot 3.0 will sit on top of Spring Framework 6, which in turn will have support for building native images, and that support is not yet there. But just on the JRE, forget about everything else. Just on the JRE, it's fast, right? So just as an incidental or as an idea, a sample, we'll go here to start.spring.io. I'm going to choose 3.0 M2 and just demo. Who cares? Java 17 because that's the right thing to do in 2022. We'll bring in the reactive web support. We'll bring in H2. We'll bring in R2DBC. And I think that's it. That's just a simple little 3.0 M2 application. I'm going to open this up in my IDE so you can see. Okay. Good. Open that up. Okay. So demo application. And I don't want to, again, this is not even what I want. This is like an amuse-bouche for Spring today. I don't even care about this as much. This isn't what I was going to show you. I just think it's pretty worth exploring. Okay, so there's this basic, repository. So it's not a real application, but it's also not completely atypical either. Okay, and then controller, surely, right? So, at response body, class, customer, REST, controller, and I want the repository. Add that. Yes. Okay. Good. So yeah, I'm just a trivial, but real-ish application. Let's just run this now. Okay. So go faster. Oh, okay. So that was the first time it had to compile. Let's do that one more time. Yeah, there you go. Well, that's actually a little bit slower than it was on my local machine, and it occurs to me it's because I'm streaming. But yeah, 0.6 seconds for a web app talking to a database, which is, and also starting up the database. It's got the database embedded in its memory, and it's bringing it up when the application starts up. So yeah, that's all. I just think that's like the coolest thing ever. Look at that, lightning fast. And that's there's no JRE in here. When I was running this offline, I was getting less than half a second, for this whole thing. So good stuff. If I go to localhost 8080/customers. Oh, did I actually create the endpoint? Customers. Add controller. 500 server error. Oh, there's no table. Aha. Okay, well, I have to create the schema. So schema.sql, create table, customer ID serial. Key, name varchar 255, not null. And voila, here's this. And so, still an error. That's not great. What's happening now? Schema.sql source main resources. Let's see here. Okay. Also, I discovered a new feature that isn't. There we go. Okay, so the application's up, and there's my trivial little endpoint. I think that's great. Just check it out. Spring Boot 3.0. Good stuff coming. Okay, so that's not even what I wanted to talk to you about today. I just wanted to show that. I wanted to get you all to try it out. I didn't even show you the Spring GraphQL support, which is there. Just a lot of good stuff. So what I wanted to talk to you about today, ever so briefly, is some of the possibilities for. I just think this is really interesting, right? Is the possibilities for building controllers for Kubernetes. Now, so Kubernetes is a it's a YAML database, right? It's a way to turn YAML into data that could be expressed in mere bytes. So if you want to take, thousands of kilobytes of YAML and turn it into an object graph that could be represented in hundreds of bytes, you use Kubernetes to do that, right? And so Kubernetes, also will schedule containers for you. It's an easy way to orchestrate containers across a cluster, building upon lower level primitives like Solaris zones and Linux containers, right? So good stuff, right? And it's possible to use Kubernetes in Windows, and I think we all have an idea of what it is. In that YAML database technology, there is a way to build something where you can orchestrate the functioning of the platform, right? So you can take the platform, and remember, it is just a giant object server, right? It's an object server that insists on taking things in the least convenient, least efficient way, and then storing them thusly, right? But it's still an API server. It's an object server. It's just got a bunch of objects, and so it's got this idea of a reconciliation loop. So as these objects are created through sort of declarative YAML that you feed to it in the least efficient way possible, that information then gets put in the object server, and events get fired, and the machine gets set into motion to respond to those objects. Something has to take the desired state of the object that you have created and make it so, right? And so if you create, and you can create custom objects, right? You can create objects that map to whatever thing you have in the real world, right? If you want to create, let's say, a new Active Directory account, or if you want to create a new, just anything you want to deploy, anything that you can build out of the lower level components of Kubernetes, or even indeed things that are not in Kubernetes. Like for example, if you're a cloud provider, or some sort of Google or Microsoft or Alibaba or that other one, you can take those, you can call those REST APIs to provision new accounts, right? Well, if you can do that, then there's no reason you couldn't create a CRD or a custom resource definition inside of Kubernetes that, when it gets created, in turn calls those REST APIs to provision those things. So you can use the YAML as a way to by proxy create those other resources in the real world, right? It's just amazing. And so there's some really interesting possibilities. But the magic there is this concept of a reconciliation loop. Something has to take the inefficient declaration that you've fed into the database and turn it into reality, right? And that might just be, hey, when this object gets created in the API server, we want to turn that into, we need to deploy a container, right? Very, very simple thing. And so I wanted to show you a quick example of that, and not because this is particularly Spring-y. It's made better by the fact that there's an official Kubernetes Java integration, a Spring Boot starter for Kubernetes that works quite nicely. But it's not because of that we're going to look at this. It's because at the end of this process, we can take our application and turn it into a native image, a GraalVM native image, which is great because now you can build a controller that fits in, 50 megs of RAM and deploys easily inside of a Alpine Linux container. Okay, so I've got this example. I'm not even gonna bother to try and rewrite the whole thing live in the scant few minutes we've got left here. But let's suppose you go to start.spring.io and you just build a brand new project. And in that project, you would go here and let's say refresh. I would add Spring Native. I would add Lombok because YOLO. And then I think that's it. That's basically all you need and all you can get from here. And then of course Java 17 or 18, nothing less. But then I also added the Kubernetes Java Spring integration, and I added a library that I published on Maven Central with a lot of Spring native hints, including hints for the official Kubernetes Java client and for the Fabricate Java client from the distinguished competition in Rally. Okay, it's a very nice library. Now that library, this is the official Java client. They're both code generated from the Open API definitions that you see in the API server, right? So you can actually get Swagger definitions of all the objects, and you can actually code generate code for that. And that's what these clients do as well. They're actually just code generated from the APIs, right? And that code generation means that whether you're using Fabricate or the official Java Kubernetes API client, they're both going to feel like writing Go code, right? They're not going to feel very nice in my, oh so irrelevant opinion. But nonetheless, if you understand what's happening in the Go code, this should feel fairly straightforward. So you've got this idea of a reconciler. It feeds into this thing called a controller. The controller monitors the, it tries to it waits for a ready function to be true, and if it's true, it then kicks off the reconciler. The reconciler gets involved whenever an event applying to this v1 foo type gets involved, happens, right? And so this is your controller. This is a Kubernetes thing. The controller, just basically a loop, and has events that are important to your particular domain type happen. They get sent to your reconciler. Now, what I've done for this example is I've got a custom CRD called a foo, right? Because all demos are foo, right? So this is just a regular foo, and it just has a name or something like that. It's completely irrelevant at this point. Custom resource definition, foo, you're giving it a namespace. You've got some, spec information for the CRD. But remember, the CRD, the custom resource definition, it in turn is describing, this is like a meta object. It's an object that describes the layout of another object, right? In this case, my custom object. So the custom object, let's see, here's the open API definitions up here. Properties, description, no, that's not what I want. Where is it? Name, there you go. And all this YAML, we have the thing we care about, which is the name field. So it's an object that has one field. It would be like a POJO or a Java record with just a string name, except that instead of using a record in Java, we write all of that, right? Which is, it's not great. Anyway, we've got this custom CRD. So you're going to want to deploy that to your cluster. So k get CRDs. K is my alias for kubectl. And let's see here, foos, right? Foos.spring.io. So I've got this custom CRD deployed. I can now deploy an instance of it, right? And this is how I would create one instance of that foo, right? You can see I just specify the kind and the API version, and I give it a name, right? This is the field. This is the one property, and all of this that the user cares about, right? The user will care about name. Now, the thing is, once it gets created, it's just an object floating in the YAML database doing nothing, right? So the question then is, who looks for that? Who responds to it? It's kind of like Java annotations, right? Java annotations are inert. Nothing happens by their mere presence. Something has to come along and detect them, through reflection or whatever. And so in order to be notified of those, you have to have something running. That thing running is this controller. So let's get back to this. So we've got a controller which has a reconciler. The reconciler, in order to do its work, will use the API. It's an API client that in turn, it's a facade around certain typed domains in the API, in the Kubernetes API for apps. It in turn uses the low-level generic API client. But using the API to read data can sometimes be very inefficient because data changes a lot. It doesn't change all that much, and there's no need to constantly deluge the API server. So they create these things called shared index informers, which, still not quite sure what that's all about. But apparently that's a cached version of the data in the API, so you can use that to look up things if you like. There's also generic Kubernetes APIs, which are different in some way than these apps 1VP APIs, which is different from the API client. So yeah, you're forgiven for not knowing why people would do this on purpose, but there's all these different types of things, and you use that building the reconciler. So this reconciler, to do its work, I've just created a foo reconciler, and this is where most of the work of building the controller lives. And again, you're just trying to make sure that if the state of that object, that definition floating in the YAML database should change, then something actually happens in response to that, right? And so here, I get a new request. I look at the request and the namespace and the name. I create a fully qualified name, and I use that to look up an instance of the current foo. That foo gets generated from this CRD, right? So there's actually a very convenient but disgusting process that you can use to take the CRD. You do kubectl apply. It goes to the API server, and then you can code generate Java classes based on that definition, right? Now, why it has to round trip and go all the way to the Kubernetes API server and then back again, no idea, right? No idea. So here's the hackety hack magic incantation that I've discovered to make this work. This is the GitHub URL for that same foo.yaml that I just showed you. I'm going to create some directories, and then there's an official Docker container image for the Java client. You feed in all of this stuff, the namespace and the Java package that you want, and it'll generate for you the Java classes that map to those types. Whoops, hold on a second. There we go. So I have these Java classes in my models directory, which I don't really like as a convention, but I didn't know where else to put them. So these are the code-generated Java types for the status, for the spec, for the list of foos, and for the individual foos, right? And so you can see all this stuff. I didn't write any of it, thank goodness. But there is, where's the one thing I cared about again? Where's the name field? Name? Am I winning? Maybe it's in the spec. There it is. It's in the spec. So it's so there's this right here. That's the business logic. All that other stuff is just, malice. It's not good for you. It's bad. It's lots and lots of confusing code. But hey, I've got a Java class now. At least I can use that in this reconciler, and so I'm using that. I'm looking up an instance of that foo by its fully qualified name. I'm getting a foo object back. If it's null, right? Because if the object got deleted, then I can't look it up. The event I'm getting, by the way, there's no clear indication as to what event is here. You just kind of have to figure it out. So the event that I'm getting is telling me, hey, something applied to this. What happened, right? Well, if it's null, then it's been deleted, and so therefore, if it's not null, I mean, it's not been deleted. It should be created. Otherwise, it might have been deleted. So we should probably delete whatever resources were created when we created that foo in the first place, right? I didn't write that code, but you can imagine what you do there. So given that, I've got a fully qualified name for what I want to do. What I want to do is to deploy a new Nginx server, or deployment rather, each time somebody creates this foo object. So anytime somebody does kubectl apply like this, if they create a new foo, then we want to create a new deployment. And then as just a trivial example, right? This is the hello world of controllers. And so I'm saying if the foo is not null, that means that the instance of the CRD still exists in the YAML database. If it's not null, then I want to look it up, and I want to create a deployment for it. And so I derive the name of the deployment by just taking the foo's name and then suffixing it with --deployment. And then I look up that deployment using the API. If the lookup is successful, then here in my case I'm just done, right? But obviously I would do one more step. Maybe I would want to make sure that nothing has changed. Maybe I want to update it. Maybe I take the existing deployment and I compare its name. Maybe it's got some property in the Nginx. Maybe there's a HTML page that gets fed, and that page that gets loaded in the container should reflect the contents of the name, right, from the CRD. So you would do whatever you wanted to do to make sure that the deployment reflects whatever's been expressed in that CRD. You do that in this branch. If we can find the deployment, that's this branch. If we cannot find the deployment, well, then we need to create one. And you can actually do this. Via Java code. You can actually programmatically build up the YAML definitions of this object. But somehow, because it's code generated, they managed to take a language that's purpose built for creating objects and that has beautiful things like records, and still make it as inefficient as possible. And somehow it gets even worse. So I actually preferred in this case to use YAML. So what I'm doing is I'm just calling this method in my class, and this in turn just stifles the exception, the try catch. I don't want to have to worry about that. Thank you, Lumbach. And that in turn takes the resource, it turns it into a string, and I pass that YAML string to this YAML class in Kubernetes, and I take the result that comes back from that YAML thing, that it takes the YAML and deserializes it into a Java object of type class. So I take that gives me a new deployment. That deployment is based on this, right? And this is just a sample deployment, I think this is even an example in the official Kubernetes documentation, for example. It's just a Nginx deployment that creates 3 instances, 3 replicas of Nginx 1142, right, on port 80. So I don't want to recreate that all programmatically, but I do want to create a new deployment. So to help myself out, I loaded that definition, and then I just changed the name, and then I use the API to create an instance of that deployment in the actual API YAML database, right? And once that's done, I'm done. If there's any exceptions, I just log it out and move on. Okay, so are there things that could be done here? Yes, obviously I should be setting up parent, like you can actually set up a parent for an object so that it can just get cascade deleted when the parent it gets deleted, for example. You can do all sorts of things to make this more elegant. But you get the idea. You get the pattern. Let's see in action. First of all, let's just see what that looks like here. Nothing in my property file. I've already authenticated, right? So you can look at the steps here. You're going to need a GitHub. In this case, I'm using to use the code generator. You need, for some reason, a GitHub personal access token. And so I did that once, and you need a personal access token, and then you pass that token to this, this Docker login, blah blah blah. Do that, and then once you're done with that, now you can read and write the container registry on in Docker Hub, right, or Docker. Then once that's done, you run the script that creates the Java definitions for the YAML in the API server, and then you can start coding. So let's run this whole thing. Okay. Actually, let me close it down first. Okay, delete foo's all. Reset. Okay. Okay, delete deployments all. Good stuff. Restart. I had an exception back there. I think it's because there's some loose odd and end I didn't take care of. Okay, so cd Kate's CRDs, okay, apply test.yaml. Okay, that creates a new foo, right? There's a new foo. Let's make sure we got a deployment to match. Does the deployment, does it exist? We check if it does. And then it obviously didn't exist, so we created a new deployment called demo deployment. So okay, get deployments, and voila. Okay, let's see what that looks like. There you go. So there's my 3 instances. They've been there for 18 seconds. In response to me creating that test, that custom foo. Okay, good stuff. So that's not such a big deal, but like I said, I want to be able to deploy this into a cluster, and I want it to be just a background thing, right? I don't want to have to worry about it too much, and so I can turn this into a GraalVM native image. But in order to do that, somebody needs to teach the Kubernetes Java client. Somebody needs to teach GraalVM about all the wacky things that the Kubernetes Java client does that will invariably offend it, right? So there's a project called Spring Native that provides a nice, convenient component model that you can use to feed configuration into the GraalVM compiler. I have in turn got way too much time on my hands, and so I put together Spring GraalVM. I put together this hints library, which is just my little. It's where I'm stashing all my Spring Native hints, which by the way will be obsolete when Spring Framework 6 drops later this year. So enjoy it while you can. I'll just port them over to Spring Framework 6 when the time comes. But there's hints here for, among other things, the Kubernetes Java client, right? And so there's something here that actually knows about all the reflection, all about the serialization and resource loading and all that kind of stuff. And it creates dynamic hints. It programmatically creates hints for all those types. And so I don't have to worry about it. The only thing I have to worry about is the stuff that I create, right? My custom types. So I do that here. I see it, v1 foo, v1 foo list, v1 foo spec, and v1 foo status. This, I'm not even sure if this is actually required, but I haven't tried it without. So there's that. Okay, so let's see. We've got the target directory. Okay, I want to do k delete foo's all deployments. All right, good stuff. So target, there's my foo controller. That's the native image. You can see 70 megs foo controller. So it's up and running. cd crds, Kate crds, k apply minus f test. There we go. This is my application. It started up in 19 milliseconds, which is great, right? That's what we call quick. More importantly, if I look at the pgrep foo controller 5147, and then I can look at the PID. Yeah, so PID equals that env bin rss by PID. Yeah. So it's 70 megs. The whole thing is taking 70 megs of RAM to run. So you can add to that your Docker image, and you can use build packs to get a nice container for this. You just say maven spring boot build -image. image, and you got yourself a container. You can take to your container registry of choice, like VMware Harbor, and you're off to production. I hope, and that's been a very brief, ever so brief look at how to build controllers. Sorry, I ran a little long, my friends. Hope you got something out of it. Happy to answer questions later.
I thought it was awesome.
Thanks.
And the very last thing, your step where you like, hey, here's my thing, and let me get the PID and let me show you how much memory it is. I was thinking about that last night when I was working with Spring Shell, and I was like, that's something that I'm going to throw into this little client of mine. Make it a little bit easier.
When it comes to memory and PHP, less is more.
That was great. Thank you.
Thank you for indulging me. Sorry I ran long.
Amazing. All good. That was a whirlwind. Cool. So, shall we move to our next segment?
Is it our special guest?
Not quite yet.
Oh,
Although I mean, I guess we could vote on it. Yeah, we could, in the interest of time, we could go that way. I will let.
I'll drive. I think that's a great idea.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm going to introduce it.
Okay. So we'll do the Tanzu next time.
Yeah.
And we'll go
Sure.
But
straight to.
let me see if I can pull them in. I'm going to reach down.
Oh, wow. That was awesome. That was.
Welcome, Matt.
How's everybody doing?
Oh, great. We're thrilled that you're here. I'm gonna say so Matt Campbell, I'm gonna let Matt introduce himself, but Matt is a solutions architect with our modern applications business unit, Tanzu at VMware. And I met Matt. I'll just tell people how I met you. So before I was doing this job as a developer advocate, I was doing pre-sales. Our position was called platform architecture at the time under Pivotal. And I was working with a client where we arranged, the client needed some professional services assistance as they were setting up and advancing the utilization of their platform at the time, known as Pivotal Cloud Foundry, what today is Tanzu Application Service. This was probably 16, 17, I don't know, it was a while ago. And so this client embarked on sort of evaluating all of their applications and which ones were going to move to the platform and how they were going to kind of go about all of that. And then, of course, the hands-on work of actually moving applications, which involved coaching people and working with the DevOps folks and hands-on moving applications. And Matt was the anchor for that effort. And I was just so impressed by not only everything Matt knew, but like just the way that he went about dealing with people, leading with kindness, leading by example, really embodying everything that I think, Pivotal was a company of like very positive values of leading with empathy. And to me, Matt was like, he was the epitome of all of that. And I was always inspired and I learned so much. And I was just, it was just really inspiring to know people of your caliber and quality of heart and technical prowess. So I couldn't think of anyone better to join us as a guest. And so we're really thrilled to have you, Matt.
I'm so excited. I don't know how you followed last week or a Kubernetes controller for that matter, but I'm very excited to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
So I thought we'd give you a chance to introduce yourself and say, how did you end up doing what you do? What everything from like, how'd you end up here and what do you do?
How did we end up here is such a weird question. So my name's Matt. I'm on a team. So right now, maybe we'll start there and then we'll roll all the way back to the beginning. But so my team right now, what I find myself doing is working on our rapid portfolio modernization team as part of our Tanzu Labs folks. And so the sort of culmination of my working with folks trying to solve big cloud problems with big cloud tools, right, is like, what do we do when we have lots of stuff to reason about? I have lots of apps. Some of them are fancy and new. Some of them are things I acquired when I acquired some cool people, and I don't know if like they use totally different technology stacks or, PHP. There's always PHP somewhere. A lot of Python these days. All sorts of cool stuff. But so the team I'm working on now works with like reasoning about that. Like, what do I do? How do I bring tools and people and all these different perspectives together to think about it? And I know Ashish asked for a question about the app transformer. That is one of those things that we reach for these days, and we use it in a very particular way. And I can talk to that a little bit. I know as a product, it does some really cool things, in a broad sense for containerization and whatnot. We use it for discovery. Like, we use what it can do to look out at your infrastructure, all of your assets, all of your cool network flows and your vCenters, and pull all this stuff together and give us a picture of applications. Like, what applications live out there and how do they talk to each other? And more so, what runs on them? That's one thing that we haven't found another perfect tool to answer, is how do I know when this VM over here, which is part of a constellation of interesting apps that are doing the payment services, say, there's 7 VMs out there, and one of them is maybe a RabbitMQ, and you've got your PHP over here, and you've got your couple of Java services. But how do we know that it's PHP is running over here on, Apache, and we've got a Tomcat here, and we've got 3 processes running on this particular VM? So all of that said, App Transformer is a really interesting tool that pulls other pieces of information from your infrastructure, but its goal is to put together a good enough picture, I think, to be able to tell you what's out there, and then to help you containerize those workloads. My job usually
is it scanning processes running on VMs, or does it look at source code?
Does a little bit of both, actually. So it leverages the vCenter APIs to make a lot of inferences and guesses. So I think, and I'm going to stretch my vCenter experience as an app person, but you can use the vCenter APIs to understand what ports are open and what processes are running on the VM, right? So that gives us sort of like a fingerprint, like a signature. You can think of it almost like a virus scanner, where you're like, hey, I know if I've got these kinds of things going on, I can probably guess that I've got a WebLogic over here or something. So it does that, but then it also does some introspection inside the VM. It can sort of understand and scan things like Java code, where it can sort of understand the source tree and make some really interesting inferences about patterns and code behavior in there.
On source code repositories or live running applications?
No, so that's running on your live application. So imagine it finds an application, it's got a Tomcat sitting there doing cool web service stuff. It finds a war tucked into that Tomcat, and it can go in and say, let me take a look at the bytecode and sort of put together the syntax tree and decompile it and make some guesses about, oh, I see you're using caching. So now all of a sudden, not only do we know what processes are running or talking to it, but we know this application depends on a particular thing that might be meaningful when you're moving it from your data center to a cloud platform. So it's doing all these bits and pieces, it's pulling all these different perspectives about what applications are running where. And then it's sort of helping you with like a wizard to walk through some of the hard decisions about how you're going to containerize it. And then it has some really cool things around, like, I think WebSphere and Tomcat can sort of almost out of the box just push button containerize. I, frankly, as an engineer, I think to myself, okay, you containerize a magic thing with a magic tool. How do I make sure that I understand what's going on in there? But you have to think from our perspective, I'm sitting in front of 1,000 applications, and some of those don't have teams anymore, right? Some of those don't have resources available to go and, grab, hey folks, I want to pull you off of these business critical apps, and I'm going to have you containerize my cat video thing over here. And so what we've got on one hand, we've got a tool that can make a lot of the decisions and tell us how well did it work, so that maybe we can pull in our teams to do, the actual work. It's like, hey, we smoke tested it and it worked. And so now we just need our smart folks to understand and sort of act on it. Or maybe you have your cat video and you just push the button and it goes out into the ether and it's a container now and you don't have to worry about it. So yeah, super interesting. I think it just went GA earlier this year, right? So there's still a lot of interesting stuff to come for AT.
That's fascinating because I feel like this is an evolution of a product that started off by just source code scanning, if I'm not mistaken. And so it's really amazing actually to hear about the evolution and how far it's gotten, how much more that it does.
It is true. I think it is definitely a culmination of many different initiatives that have taken place over the last couple of years. I mean, we still use tools like Cloud Suitability Analyzer, which just does source code analysis. Again, I'm in the business of just give me anything. Give me every bit of data you can hand me about your bajillion apps, and let me and my, friends on my team, we sit down and we reason about it. We try and build some sort of decision framework around it. But it's all really in service of what does a team need to do? What does a company need to do on this transformation journey? And where's the right place to start? What do we spend our limited attention span, our limited people, our limited talent, and where can we make the most bang for our buck there? So it's a fun time. Oh, go ahead.
No, I was going to ask how that's changed how you go about the work of helping companies. How much has it helped that whole effort that was more, I guess, manual or relied more on conversations, and now you can come in with a tool? What kind of difference has it made in the way you engage with customers to have this kind of tool?
That's a great question. I think it opens up different doors for us and for customers. If you think about most customers, they're in a lot of different places. So some folks need, let me move fast. I've got a data center migration and I've got a deadline and I've got a boss or a boss's boss that's already promised things, right? And so the more tools you can throw at something to do the drudge work, take the manual toil off of things, the better. But honestly, there's still a lot of times where talking to people and looking at a chunk of the portfolio, I don't need to look at your 1,000 apps to give you something valuable, some meaningful place to start. I could start with the first 100 or even the first 20, you know what I mean? And we can start to make good choices about what's going to make developers' lives better and what's going to make meaningful business impact. So these days, I look back at my engagements over the last couple, and they look a lot like older engagements. It's just different tools, a different toolbox. You go and you reach for the right one at the right time, and maybe that's AT, maybe it's CSA, maybe it's a good old-fashioned interview. There's just so many different
What is CSA? So AT is Application Transformer, which is what we're talking about.
CSA is Cloud Suitability Analyzer. It's an open source, I'd call it a static code analysis tool. That was written by VMware in the service of this kind of work. It was a scanner that sort of looks not for generic stuff. If you think of SonarQube or Find Bugs, it's looking for issues, common things or code quality things that you might worry about. This was to encode really the stuff that our solutions architects were finding, when we worked with a customer. Hey, what's meaningful? What makes a difference when you're going on this cloud journey? Well, it's that I depend on the file system, your 12-factor stuff. It's I have JBoss stuff in there. Okay, well, how is JBoss okay, or do I need to do something with that? And so really, it's an automated way for us to write all these rules and sort of test the waters really quickly with a source code repository, instead of having to ask an architect or dig up you know, where did John go? He was the last one to work on, you know, this particular service. So
Yeah, where did John go? That's funny.
you know,
Yeah.
he's working on the cat videos app over there. But so it's really interesting.
Yeah. No, go ahead.
Like, I think that the funny thing is that, you know, I look at this particular job working with folks looking at lots of apps, but, you know, my pedigree, the thing that you mentioned, Cora, like the place we ran into each other was actually sort of the genesis, you know, one of the earliest places where we tested this process, which was if we, instead of just showing up and finding an app to get started, a team to get started, could we do this better? Could we make more of a difference if we looked broadly first and like tried to take more of a strategic approach to like where would we start? And so it's interesting because I sort of come full circle a little bit. I was on the delivery team after this navigator kind of thing. I wasn't the one doing the analysis at that point. I was the person whose job it was to come in and help teams, that those first 10 teams that were like at the top of this list of apps, the ones that somebody said, you guys are the place to start. You're the most meaningful way to tackle, you know, your migration. And what I got to see was, what did it mean to like hit those meaningful teams, like work quickly in the course of a couple of weeks and pair with developers that frankly came from all over the spectrum of like where their experience level lies, what they you know, did in their free time in terms of like what they were familiar with in the tech ecosystem, how much they even cared about this, you know, cloud stuff. And so it was really exciting to get to work on like hand in hand, like next to all of these different people and say, like, help them figure out what the right piece of this puzzle was. Like, and, you know, it's a little different for everybody. Like not every person is ready to go full bore 10 microservices. You should have no less than 10 microservices and you should be able to use, you know, all of these cool things. And instead it's like finding the way, the ergonomic fit, like for a team. It's like, what do they need from the technology to do the thing that they set out to do? And here I am now, the person or you know, part of a team that's trying to reason about all these stuff, but we're still trying to land those perfect teams, those perfect apps, find the perfect places to start so that companies can really, you know, get the most out of the technology and the platforms and the work that these teams are doing.
So like in your day-to-day, oh yeah, go Deshaun.
I was just like, this is a question that literally just came up today with a friend. Hey, we're in Series D. We've got a lot of stuff happening. We're heading this way. All sorts of stuff, all over all different teams. But change happens over time. And yeah, people left. Where's John? Who's on cat video duty? And the question is like, we know that we need help. Where do we start? And this tool, the one that I added the link there, this is something I used. It was a part of my toolkit back in the day where like, hey, we're cool. I actually combined it with the crawler from the old Spring Cloud pipelines. So I didn't even need the source code pulled down in the directory. I was pulling it down with the crawler.
That's cool.
Like, oh yeah, just point me to your GitHub org. I'm pointing it right now to Josh's GitHub org. And I'm going to pull it down and I'm going to see which one of these applications really should be running on Kubernetes and which one has PHP code. And that's what I'll do. And it's just a way of looking, and it gives you this nice little, well, it was like a histogram, if I recall. It's like, hey, scale 1 to 10. These are you know, complex, simple. And then the interview part was like, which one of these matter, right? Which one of these apps in this portfolio, which ones matter the most? You got to kind of find a sweet spot. You don't want to get the most complex one that's running on the IBM Z. You want to get one that you can like, hey, let's do a small experiment. Let's work together. And there's an art to that part. And that experience that you've got of running these exercises and finding out how do we get started, that's something that I get super excited about.
I guess partially it's that part of it is about the app, moving the app and figuring out what the app needs to be replatformed or modernized. But then the other part is like the teaching coaching side, where really the important thing is to enable the people so that they can not only deal with that app, but other apps, or for them to enable other people. And maybe that's probably more important than imagine.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the things I loved about joining Pivotal 5 or so years ago. Like I came from a sort of small to medium-sized defense contractor. I worked there for 10 years. I was a programmer, an individual contributor, doing all this cool stuff and sort of testing the waters with like team lead and scrum master and all like PM and all the things that like, you know, everybody wears all the hats on a little team like that. But then I had a friend that joined Pivotal and like I was like, oh man, I don't know if I could do professional services. Like I get like the sweats when I had to go and present to a customer, you know what I mean? It was like, you do it twice a year and it was like, you were going in for some sort of like surgery or something, like just nervous, like the anxiety through the roof. And the thing that I realized when I came over is that like, it's this perfect fusion of like people problems and learning problems and technology problems. Like the programming part is only half of it, right? It's only part of it.
I was gonna say, you repeat yourself. Like, just say people problems. Everything else.
Yeah, absolutely. But like it's so exciting to realize that that's what we do as consultants, as service folks, right? To help people manage all this complicated software, all this stuff, all this technology, and that it like sort of works. Like, you know, I used to be all like crazy scared when you're talking to a customer, and then you realize actually everybody's just people, and they're all trying to figure out these like same challenges and problems, and there's very little that is as exciting as sitting down with somebody who's like new to all of this, like fresh out of college, and he got selected to be on this team where he has to pair program with, you know, one of these folks from Pivotal that's going to teach him all this cool stuff. And you realize that like you don't have to teach them everything. You just have to like be there and help figure out like how do you navigate this crazy pile of YAML to solve this one thing that's in front of them. You know what I mean? And so now it's, you know, this is 5 years in, I'm still in love with the people part of what we do. We're sort of mapping technology stuff to people stuff, and we get to be the glue for it.
The people part. And another thing Cora brought up is like the translation, the passing down. I was talking before the show how I used to watch Josh Long videos going to bed. So my wife knows his voice. My wife knows the story, and she's like, oh, another Spring Boot. Like, this is what we did. And I did it for like a year. But there's a difference here.
I'm sorry.
I used that. That was my version of pairing, right? A small, 5-person startup. That's how I paired. So Josh was my pair, and this is how I was going to do it. But I was going to translate. I was going to take all of the examples that he did, and I was translating it to our domain so that the rest of the engineers didn't have to go and watch his video and do that translation themselves. We actually, with the channels, and I'm trying to look at Cora with the pipelines and all the cartographer, like, it doesn't take a whole company to have to come and sit down with a group like this. It can be one person that comes down and they ask the questions and they get the insight, and then they can go and when they say A, think B. When they say W, think you red, right? And they can do the translation, and it can spread out faster than this group trying to talk to 20 people.
Yeah, well, so one of the things that I was so impressed by when I would watch, Matt and his team do their work, is that in that coaching, in that teaching, so that you can enable the person to go teach, there's two elements, right? There's the element of tech, and then there's the element of culture.
Culture, yeah.
And I always found that, like, I think I've said it already 3 times in the last, on here, on this live now, but like, I was always so inspired and impressed by that, because it was always with empathy, with respect, right? Like, always, and doing that by example, by treating people with respect and with empathy, and creating a collaborative culture. So, because that's, that ultimately you need to teach people to take that forward as well, that when they move it forward, that they have to do it, that they should do it. It benefits everyone to do it in the same way, with kindness and compassion.
I mean, I was lucky to learn from some of the best in both the tech and the people side, right? Like you put a kid like 10 years out of school, no business standing in front of the people, solving some of these problems. But, in that world, they sort of already, I like to say, like, they already thought we could do it. Like, they already believed it. Like, it was already a done deal. The vision was really clear. They just needed the help to navigate through that, to figure out what parts to pick and how to, like, level up their people. And there's something really magical about, like, showing up and being like, yes, like, I can help, like, navigate, like, something that's really stressful, frankly, for a lot of teams, right? They're in this pile of technology that, I'm from Central New York, so we're not a technical hub. I'll just say that. If you want to hire somebody who's like super fancy and could go to one of, the FANG, like, business, you're not going to get them. Like, that's just basically it. You get to pretend like you can do big data or AI or whatever, but you don't really get actual people. But they still have to do the job. Like, all of these companies are still doing awesome business stuff for their customers, and they're stressed out and they're stuck trying to figure out how do they make use of all of this more and more complicated technology, frankly. And then you're sort of there and you're like the cat whisperer. You're like, no, it's okay. Yeah. It's going to be fine. And I think that's one of the things we did learn really early on, is that as a leader in a room, you get to define the energy of the momentum of the energy in that room. Like, sometimes it just takes somebody in a position of power to say it's going to be okay. Like, we're going to figure this out, right? And I use position of power very lightly as a 29-year-old or whatever. But yeah, it's just there's a really powerful thing to walk in and help somebody know that it's going to be okay, and then deliver on that it's going to be okay with all this cool tech.
Can you tell us a little more about, like, the side of things where gathering a whole bunch of different stakeholders and using certain kind of facilitation techniques in order to really drive a meeting to the right conclusions or to the right
Yeah, I mean, we've all been on too many Zooms over the last 2+ years or whatever. So I think lots of people have been in weird meetings or useless meetings or not great meetings. But I think there's a really powerful thing when you get lots of different perspectives in a room to, like, workshop a well-facilitated thing. That's partly because, like, platforms don't really just, like, deal with one. They're not just developers sitting in the room building this cool thing anymore. It's the folks running the platform, it's the security folks, it's the DevSecOps people, it's the people, all of the business that makes that happen. Like, the platform is just too big and too diverse to be 8 guys in a room trying to figure this out. And so you need all those perspectives at the table to solve a lot of these challenges. So again, there's a power to being invited into a customer's house and being told you can invite all these people. A lot of folks sitting in their desk don't think that they can invite the CTO to come over and, like, solve this thing with them. So we're very privileged to sort of unlock that for some customers. But at the end of the day, like Rob said it last time, like, people just want to be productive. They don't want to show up and be wasted, but they also want their voices heard. And so there's a lot of fun when you get folks that really care about the problem or the business that's really happening there, and you put them in a room where, like, they don't usually get to talk to each other. Like, there's this person from the business is like, nobody ever listens to me. I don't know, like, why would these engineers listen to me? And we are, right? And so there's all of a sudden you start to see sparks where they're happy to tell you about things that maybe nobody is ever writing down because the politics are weird, or the org chart shaped it a certain way. So yeah, there's, like, lots of tools. We talked about AT and CSA. those are technical tools. Those are things we reach for over here. But on the other hand, there's all these like people tools. There's all these ways to bring the right folks together to like squeeze the juice out of them and figure out like what the meaningful bit is there. And I've learned from some of the best in that regard as well. Just watching people orchestrate, like getting to the result you want, where you're basically bringing a lot of expensive people into a room to do something. You got to leave that meeting with valuable stuff, right? So it's just really fascinating to get to watch and learn, and then ultimately do that, to be the person that helps bring all those brains together and do cool stuff.
Do you have ideas on where somebody could learn to do that? Because I've watched you guys do this, right? And so essentially what I've seen is gathering a whole bunch of different as you're saying, right? Different stakeholders who might not normally be gathered in a room to do this sort of activity. And then you would lead, everybody gets like sticky Post-it notes. And then you would guide them through very structured facilitation motions that would be either, brainstorm and then, sort or rank or deduplicate, or
yeah.
And then you would guide that to a certain ending.
Mm-hmm. So I think like from a practical perspective, like the Tanzu Developer Center, like the website has a practices section, which like I look at still to this day. Like I have a specific need. I need to find this answer or get to this like endpoint. What tool can I pull from? There's a lot of really cool stuff in there. There's stuff I've never used before. There's stuff I use like weekly. But in a general sense, and I will steal the opportunity to plug it every chance I get. A couple of years ago, I ran into this book by Priya Parker called The Art of Gathering. And so the funny thing is I bought this for my wife because she's like the event planner of my family. She's the one that, you'll bring people for a dinner, you'll invite friends over, and she'll have the menus printed out, and she'll have like the plan, and it's like, and I'm like more like, no, nobody wants all of that like process, and like that's a little kooky, right? And so I giggled, and I got this book thinking we would like read it together, or she would enjoy it. And I was on travel at one point, and I was flying, and I had this audiobook, and I was listening to it, and I had this epiphany that it wasn't really a book about planning dinner parties. Like it does talk about that, but Priya Parker she does these massive like nonprofit dinners, these like getting, confrontational organizations to solve their things. It's like a manifesto for designing anytime you're going to put something on the calendar. Like when you're asked for a person's time, it's about designing the experience, right? To get to an outcome, whatever that looks like. And so to this day, it's one of the most interesting, like random finds. I had no idea what I was going to run into. But I still to this day, like I hand it to my coworkers if there's a reason to give somebody a book. And I still think about this, like design end to end. Like it's not going to happen by itself. You're not going to be able to just say, we're going to have a retrospective, right? We're going to meet and have a goal setting thing for our team today, or we're going to design the most beautiful architecture. Like it could be a technical thing, right? I've sat in those things where you sit down in front of a whiteboard and you get smart people and they just think so hard about all these things they're drawing. And like half the time it was great because we showed up, we drew all these smart pictures, and we still didn't have any actual answers, but we felt good about ourselves. You know what I mean? But there are ways, if you thought about, I'm going to sit down with these smart people and we're going to come to a conclusion on what kinds of things we need to solve. And how would I design that experience? How would I design the hour with them so that it was the most productive? I'm still learning about that to this day, but I sort of take it as a challenge for anything, big or small. Like it could be a retrospective. How am I going to get this team I've never met before to be honest with each other or honest with me, or to actually do something cool the next week with it? Or it could be a Path to Prod workshop with 70 people that have never talked to each other, and we're trying to figure out the dysfunctional aspects of the old CI/CD processes and the new ones. And like, you just get such a wide variety of people and needs, but it all comes down to how are you going to set that session up for success, you know, and half the time it doesn't work, frankly, like anything, you know, it goes off and it feels weird, and then you sort of,
That's interesting.
you know, iterate on it, experiment on it. But the more I think about it intentionally, I feel like the more it comes out better in the long run.
I think that there was always something interesting about like the fact that all these stakeholders are together going through this exercise in each other's presence, and in the moment being able to comment on the input from others meant that by the end, let's say you have all these 20 different stakeholders trying to describe the path to production. By the end, there is an inherent consensus that what the group has arrived at, everybody agrees with. And that was so powerful.
There's always, I mean, you can't remove the bias in the room and the agendas and the politics that happen around it. But there's something, you can't really argue with the fact that you have a bunch of people talking about something that maybe went unsaid before you showed up. Like, hey, you've got this group over here building their secret platform. Like, it's like, once it's done, it's going to blow the top off this company. And like, oh, that the other folks that are trying to do the other thing, they're the enemy, right? And like, oh, there's no, like, all of these groups are trying to vie for success, but success is really like do what works and help teams develop software and ship it better, right? So at the end of the day, getting a lot of people in a room trying to yell at each other and then ultimately putting it all in stickies, it's therapeutic. So
It is. We have Amero Amigo 1 says, I'm in the middle of both a platform engagement and an application navigator engagement. And also said at one point, gotta train my ops folks at some future date. Holy crap.
Oh, it sounds exciting. I love our platform folks. They're awesome.
Yeah. So we had talked a little bit. So you and I were chatting a little yesterday, and you were talking about some of the work that you started out in the Hadoop space.
Yeah, I mean, I spent about 10 years at this defense contractor whose bread and butter was actually radar systems, but I'm not a radar engineer at all. Like, I don't know anything about electrical engineering, and they did really cool stuff where they could like jam IEDs before, like when somebody pushed the trigger on their phone, like it could like catch it, jam it, let the folks drive by safely, and then sort of capture that information. So it was like this really big, interesting thing, especially, in the last 15, 20 years of our life here in like wartime. But my job was not that. Unfortunately, I showed up. I had already had my foot in the door with defense stuff. And so once you're in, you're sort of like in. Like, nobody's like, oh, we did all the paperwork, so let's just keep you here. So my team was like more big data analytics on small problems. Like, it was this little scrappy team that was sort of looking for DARPA stuff and any little research problem that you could throw interesting analytics at. And I think part of that was because around that time, Hadoop was big, and like you had this sort of like democratization of all of that. Yeah, it was a lot of fun. I learned a lot as a developer there, partly because, like I said, you have to wear all these hats. But there's a sort of a weird thing with the defense industry that's always like sort of trailing or chasing maybe what is new and going on in the rest of the technology space. And so it was interesting to be on that side of things in this research space with Hadoop when it was sort of big. But then to be able to like watch that, I guess all the things I learned about running this really complicated distributed system for that purpose. And all of a sudden it was like, oh, here's Cloud Foundry, which is infinite, 50 VMs doing all the things, trying to like make life easier in its own way. And so echoes of past lives all through it.
I think that would transition us into our next segment, evolution or revolution? So this is the segment where we figure out what we think if something was evolutionary. So 2 weeks ago, we talked about Spring Boot, and Josh explained just why Spring Boot is so revolutionary and has and been so impactful over the last 6, 7, 8 years. So given your background with Hadoop, I think today's segment could be on, I would say, HDFS more specifically than Hadoop, right? The highly distributed file system, HDFS, which would be, right? And whether that was that an evolution? What was the impact, I guess, and what was that? Maybe a quick definition of what it was, and then if that was evolutionary from something or really revolutionary.
So I'm gonna remind everyone that living in Central New York, you like pretended to do this stuff. Like I'm sure there are people out there who are like, I have the answer to this down pat.
This is our answer,
right? But so the interesting thing was that Hadoop was like an ecosystem. It was a thing. Lots of people ran into it because it was the MapReduce, the implementation of what Google was doing, and they're like, cool. Like they did this thing that was like infinite scale, kind of whatever, and all of a sudden it became open source, and anybody with a big problem could all of a sudden become big data scientists. And all you had to do is run this complicated cluster of things like Hadoop and Zookeeper and HDFS and HBase, and I mean the ecosystem just grew around this need. But if I had to say like one or the other, like I feel like it was revolutionary in the sense that, I mean, and I was young at the time, so maybe this is a great wheel and technology is always turning, but like to take something that Google was doing and like make it available to the masses, all of a sudden everyone had this tool in their tool belt that they felt like they could operate at Google scale. I feel like maybe that's like blasé today because everything operates, like everybody's a Netflix now, right? But I don't really think we were definitely doing it when we had no license to do it. Like we should never have been like trying to operate this complicated thing.
Yeah.
But it was a tool that all of a sudden like didn't have a corollary. Like we couldn't tackle these problems in quite the same way before. So that's my pitch. I think it was evolutionary. It's funny because it doesn't seem like it's a big thing right now, but it was a turning point in the industry.
So you're saying revolutionary or evolutionary?
Yes, revolutionary.
Revolution. Yeah.
With the R.
I think so too. I mean, I think that so you're pointing out that like one of the revolutionary things about it was that it was exposed, it was made available to the masses, right? What Google had done for themselves was now sort of publicly available and accessible. But I would even go a step back from that and say that what Google would not have been possible. Like Google had to reinvent the way that we approach commodity computers and data and unstructured data in order to even make it possible to become the kind of cloud scale company that they were. And I remember, so I don't know if everyone is familiar with HDFS, I may not give the best definition of it, but when I learned about it, I think there was the aspect, you mentioned MapReduce, right? So I guess MapReduce was something that was Google. I don't know if it was just Google or Google and one other company, but they published some white papers in like 2007, 2008 about this concept called MapReduce, which basically, I think the essence of it was if you have, because before that, we had all these databases for like columns and rows and everything was structured data and you could, run SQL on it. But at this point we had so much unstructured data from the internet, pages or logs or whatever. And so the idea was to take all of this data and divide it. So you could take one document and split it into many little pieces. You don't have to have a complete document on one computer in order to analyze it. So take that document, split it in some, arbitrary pieces, spread it across many computers, make of every like fragment of that document, make several copies so that now it accomplishes two things, right? Because by making that data redundant, suddenly you can lose computers. And so suddenly all of your infrastructure becomes cheaper because you've got copies of stuff all over the place. You just need to have one computer that knows where all those copies are. And then because your data is split up, if you want to, let's say, count all the words in a certain document or count all the times, I remember the classic example was like spreading out Shakespeare's, entire works and counting the number of times the word love shows up. So you send
Every time we had to do that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So you send your program that counts the number of times the word love shows up to the computers where all the data is. And then they add up those number of times the data that the word love shows up at those computers. And so now instead of moving around all of Shakespeare's works from one computer to another to count the data, you just move a tiny number, just the sum of how many times love shows up in one fragment of the document. And you're just transmitting, tiny bits of information. And then you add that number back. And that's how you reduce it, right? So you're mapping your logic and then you reduce the result. So that was a completely, I don't know if there was an evolution, like there must be, like you're saying, everything's a cycle, but like I would also call it a revolution because I think that approach was so I think different, right? And it enabled cloud scale companies and it enabled analysis of large unstructured data based on this new design, a new way of approaching file analysis, really, right? File storage and analysis. Josh, you're on mute.
Oh, you're double muted.
You're like on your.
Still can't hear you, Josh. No, I can't hear you. I can see your mouth. But I can't hear you.
Maybe the change the headset. Meantime, I'm gonna go check the chat. Square Pond, thank you. It's so funny. Sometimes you don't know who the person behind the handle is, but thank you.
What do we think about etcd for Kubernetes?
Test.
Yeah, now I hear you, Josh. What do you think about etcd for Kubernetes?
Well, so if I may finish my train of thought, I was thinking about that because have you ever used Luster? Right? From I think Sun eventually bought them, but when I use them, it's a distributed file system, right? And it's very expensive. I mean, super expensive. And it's not like we didn't have massively scalable, not to the extent that HDFS eventually got, but it's not like we didn't have consistent, pliable ways to think about storing data. I think it feels revolutionary because that HDFS because of the utility of the processing model, Hadoop, the big MapReduce, I think it became very popular and people used it, and that created a lot of data. And then that, you get to Dave McCrory's data gravity, right? The idea that a little bit of data in a silo starts attracting apps that then contribute more data and they need a place to stash it. So they end up stashing it adjacent to the existing data, and you just get more and more data. The more data you've got, the more data tends to get pulled into it, like a black hole in space or something like that, pulling in all data, and it becomes intrinsically sort of part of that mass. You can't pull it out, right? And so that's Dave McCrory's data gravity thing. The example, at the time was like Salesforce, right? Salesforce has all your customer data. Well, of course, people build apps and extensions and all that stuff around Salesforce. Well, where's that data going to live? Well, that lives in Salesforce. And now you've got even more data. So now you've got to build more apps on top of that, right? And it just becomes this big knot, that you can't get undone. So I think HDFS, in the sense that it is where people's data lived, it was literally the definition of the warehouse, the data lake that we were all talking about for a decade, right? That was truly huge. But I don't know if the idea of a big file system in of itself was revolutionary without Hadoop, which, like you said, moved the processing to the data, right? That was unique because they worked together. The MapReduce it understood locality, right? It understood that this data is near me and I could do work here, right? But I don't know. I really liked HDFS, and obviously there's Gluster. Have you ever heard of Gluster? That's the open source Luster, things
Yeah.
like that. But there's just nothing that, even now, I don't know what I would use, to get that kind of scale today.
I feel like the interesting thing was that it's almost like for a while we were building our own little Hadoop clusters, and everybody was like running these like farms, and they were trying to do all their stuff, and that's sort of commoditized. Like the cloud vendors have caught up, and generally it's a lot like most platformy things. It's like, how can we provide you the benefit without having without having you have to know intrinsically all the bits and pieces. And so now you've got,
and change
Google
everything about it.
Yeah. So I feel like that's a curve. Like it stopped being so interesting in and of itself, but it was sort of that early cloud scale thinking that all of a sudden was available to anybody.
Back then it was like, what do you mean I need to use a whole warehouse full of computers to do word count, And, it just sounds silly now, but, back then I was like, yeah, let's go. I've got nothing else I need to do with my time.
I'll say,
this sounds
like
an
you
experiment.
got people to sign off buying, 20 desktops to go stick under your cubicle. It's like, but I have to create a big data lake. So.
God.
The data puddle under my lake.
Mm-hmm.
On my desk. Data puddle.
I like it. Cool.
So we have we have some etcd questions. What do we think about etcd for Kubernetes? And then more context for teams, companies, etc., trying to build things for Kubernetes. We either are forced to leverage Kubernetes pagination API or maybe interact with etcd directly.
I don't really have an opinion here. I have never interacted with etcd directly. I have done experiments on why is it etcd? Like, why couldn't it be SQLite? Like, let's pull things in and plug other things in just to see, right? There's lots of other architectures and approaches, but I think for now, etcd is kind of the standard. But I have not run into a problem with anything Kubernetes related where I thought, maybe trying something besides etcd would solve it. So yeah, I'd be interested to learn more about what you're facing and what you're running into, because that's not a problem that I hear from the network that I've got, the tiny little group that I.
Yeah, I wonder if we maybe we could bring this back up if we could get a guest that has more experience, because I just haven't done enough work to know enough to. But one thing that strikes me about the question is this more. Let me put it back on screen. We're either this is for teams, companies that are trying to build things for Kubernetes. So rather than just deploying applications onto Kubernetes, right? So it's a little bit more specific. And we're saying we're either forced to leverage Kubernetes pagination API or maybe interact with etcd directly. And so I haven't been in that position where I've had to face the possibility of interacting with etcd directly, but it just strikes me as not probably recommended, right? The reason that the API server is fronting etcd, like it's the API server is the entry point to etcd for a reason. So to interact with etcd directly, to me, seems like breaking sort of a basic design premise.
Encapsulation.
But yeah.
I like guardrails.
So,
yeah.
I feel way better when I got guardrails. Yeah.
I'm with Cora on this one. I don't know anything about it, so when in doubt, ask Cora.
Well, but maybe maybe in the future we'll have a guest who has been in that situation where there is enough reason or frustration or apparent limitations to want to consider working with etcd directly. But it does seem like probably you'd be on your own. You'd be in this unsupported sort of Kubernetes if you're, I suppose.
Yeah, there's
the size of a Kubernetes cluster that you'd see at a big company. Like, I just wonder, like pagination. Anytime I see pagination, I think of all the time somebody wrote their MVP and they didn't paginate things, and then they assumed I was always going to be working with, the 40 records that are in my test database, and then all of a sudden you connect to the thing and there's 4.6 million entities being funneled to, and it's like, well, of course we're just going to be here all day. It's fine. So pagination itself feels like a set of guardrails, like for your system to not fall over and your system to not ask Kubernetes to give it all 4.2 million records. So it seems like, maybe that's ergonomically, it sort of sucks. Like you have to build that extra layer of logic in to deal with it, but it gives you a sense that you're not going to have to do it. But it's tough to know without the actual use case, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's like what some reactive going on between yourself and the API server. Seems like would be a nice middle ground there.
But it's a good question, right? Like that's the other part of what we do here. I think all of us in this group, we get to hear a lot of interesting things, right? Not everybody is going to DevOps and to Spring One Tour in Chicago. They don't always get all the latest and greatest news, but they are still dealing with very, very interesting problems in interesting domains too. So yeah, I love hearing these kind of questions, and we're lucky to. I'm definitely going to spend some cycles thinking about that. Like, what would be the case where I would decide to ignore the API, or try to optimize the API that exists, or the backing store for that API. Yeah, some interesting. I assume it's something super, super interesting that they're working on.
Food for thought. Like our little logo.
Exactly. Sounds relevant.
Yeah. Well, so Josh, did you have a tweet?
Yeah, I saw a tweet, and it gave me the giggles. So I feel like we can share it. Hold on, I got this. I'm gonna share my screen. Let's see here.
I'm curious to see
Just
what
thought
a
this-
4-person screen share looks like. Let's find out.
All right.
We need our little music, our little background.
Yeah,
There you go.
I wasn't fast enough. Oh, let's see.
Just thinking about security and all that, and I found this.
Oh yeah, I saw that one today. Yes.
Don't know why, but that's my new favorite tweet for the day. And then, of course, the comments are great too, right? Was it somebody else's? Molly McCall. Oh, okay. Whoops.
All right, well.
Somebody else. Oh, awkward. Okay, I didn't see that part.
Oops.
Whoops.
Single sign off.
But no, there's. Okay, Twitter, go away. That's enough of that.
That is funny.
Just wanted that. Want to put that in your head before the weekend.
Square Pond is offering another good one. I don't know how to. I don't know how to click on a.
Usually, you want to look at it offline before you throw it up on the screen. But yeah.
No. I mean, I don't know how to click on copy paste from a.
I don't either.
Comment. Square Pond. We're gonna look that up after. It's in chat.
An iOS device.
So I'm gonna. Here's a disclaimer, but I don't know what this tweet is.
We haven't checked it out.
Yeah, this is. We don't know what this is. I'm just sharing. Just Square Pond is sharing. But we don't actually have a way to, like, for some reason, copy paste from a comment.
Technology is hard.
Yeah.
Technology is hard.
Oh, new party. Oh, new party here. We'll put this one up. New party. Blindfolded post by darts at the CNCF landscape. You have to build a cluster out of what you heard. Nice.
That sounds like something that. Yeah.
Somebody sent a picture of a CNCF puzzle, like a 1,000-piece CNCF puzzle. Also looks great.
Yep.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, is that a wrap?
I think so. This was a good talk. It was a good talk.
Yeah.
Good stuff.
Thanks to everybody who joined us today and everybody who commented in chat and participated with us. Matt.
Especially Matt.
Yes. Thank you for joining.
Well,
Thank you for sharing.
guys, for inviting me. This is a blast. Anytime you can get together and talk about people who are doing technology stuff, right, and how to make life better for them, sign me up. I'm good.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Excellent.
Rock
I
on.
appreciate you. I appreciate
Have
all
a
of
great
you.
weekend, everybody. We'll
This
see
is
you all
good.
next week, I guess.
Yeah.
We're in 2 weeks. Next week, we're going to be in Chicago. Some of us.
We're gonna
not-
be in Chicago.
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
Oh,
Deshaun and I.
Claude.
Josh will be there remotely, right? You're zooming in
Yeah.
virtually, and
In spirit.
Deshaun and I will be there for Spring One tour. So
Because I might have been exposed to COVID, out of an abundance of caution,
Mhm.
I'm staying home.
yeah,
But I miss you all, and I wish that I could be there with you and a giant box of pizza in person.
we'll send pictures of the giant box of pizza.
It won't be the same without you.
And you've got to go to 3 Dots and a Dash, the tiki bar.
Okay, I'm writing it down.
All right. Excellent. Thank you, everyone.
Awesome. All right. Thanks again, Matt.
Thanks,
Good night,
everybody.
everybody.
Good night.
Thanks,
Good
man.
night, everybody.
China Tech Expedition with